So this is my guide for every single weapon that is currently craftable in the Season of the Plunder, which is Season 18. Currently in week 3 of the season, so all of this is subject to, of course, the balancing and sandbox changes that happen over the course of Destiny being a live game. And of course new weapons will be added that are craftable that might outclass current ones. So for now, for this season, for this current iteration of the sandbox, these are the weapons that I would recommend crafting and actually investing the time and resources into. I'm going to be pretty blunt about this because a lot of weapons are just generally not the meta, and most players gravitate towards using more efficient options, and so there are certain archetypes or entire weapon classes that not a lot of people use, like autos, for example. There's a few categories that most of these weapons are going to fall into. One of them being, if you like this type of weapon, then by all means use it. I'm not going to tell you that just because a weapon isn't as efficient as other weapons that you should never use it again. If you like using auto rifles, go for it. You have a good selection between all of these auto rifles and their perk combos. As far as Come to Pass goes, its perk pool isn't the best. It's not that great. Sweet Sorrow isn't much better, so between those two, you're not really going to have much of a difference. Come to Pass, I would say, is probably a bit easier to craft because it's a Throne World weapon, so getting red borders for that isn't as hard as grinding seasonal past season drops for Sweet Sorrow. Firefight is also kind of mediocre in what it can do, and the same goes for the Amit. Of course, it's a solar weapon and it has incandescent, which is kind of a interesting perk. I've used it in the past on other weapons that are very good, and I don't really see a lot of mileage that comes from incandescent, and I know a lot of people like to run it and use it for solar builds, and I know it can synergize well, but as far as just how general gameplay goes in PvE for the game right now, I would say it's not really that great of a perk, but that's just my opinion, and I would still recommend it because of how much praise it gets and how often it gets used. So I know it can roll on the Amit, and I know the Amit is basically a free craftable weapon because of the Enclave's quests this season, so I would suggest that if you're looking for an energy auto. As far as bows go, it's another archetype of weapon where if you like bows, by all means go for it. Under Your Skin can get some great PvE and PvP rolls, like enhanced, well obviously enhanced, but hipfire grip and opening shot for PvP is a great combination, and then for PvE I personally have Dragonfly and Unrelenting just for general ad clear. And then Feltara Diddle is kinetic bow, and it can roll with decent perks as well for PvP. I wouldn't really recommend it for PvE though. As far as hand cannons go, everyone knows Ostringer is amazing, one of the best 140s in the game, and so I would definitely highly recommend crafting that and going for your preferred roll that you want, with, you know, opening shot, Eye of the Storm, or other things similar to that nature. Zauli's Bane is an interesting one because it's much of a preference weapon to where people don't really like the model of the gun, but it's the energy Fatebringer because it can roll with explosive payload Eye of the Storm or opening shot Eye of the Storm. So for that reason I am more than willing to craft it once I can. I think it's going to be a really good weapon to use, and it's going to definitely do well because it can roll those perks. Its stats aren't as good as something like Palindrome, and so if you have a good Palindrome, I would say just use that because Palindrome is just statistically better. But if you never got a good Palindrome, then this is definitely the energy hand cannon to go for because it's craftable and you can guarantee yourself a god roll. So I would highly suggest that. been farming for that from the raid from King's Fall. Pulse rifles are interesting because pretty much all of them are good. Syncopation is kind of okay, but it can still hang. But Insidious is a 4-burst pulse, the only energy one that's not sunset right now. It's great. It's a Vow of the Disciple weapon, so that pretty much makes it good either way. Has great perk combinations with Rapid Hit and Rampage, or having, I believe it can roll with Dragonfly in the first row. Yeah, it can. So having that, or something similar, again it can roll with Rapid Hit, and then One for All, Bait and Switch is a high damage perk. Rampage, anything like that. It can roll Demolitionist, Adrenaline Junkie, which is a tried and true combo. So that's always something good to go for. Peace of Mind is a PvP menace, if that's the right word. It's a great PvP weapon. Highly recommend crafting it for that, with running something like either Perpetual Motion in the first column and Elemental Capacitor, or if you want to go for the cool guy roll of Overflow and Focus Fury to try and proc Focus Fury. It's kind of hard to make things like that work when you can just go for base stats like Perpetual Motion and Elemental Capacitor, or Harmony. Harmony is also a great roll, but I would definitely recommend crafting this thing. It's feels very good. It's very comfortable archetype to use and works great in PvP, so I would highly recommend that. Syncopation, like I said, is kind of okay. There's better options that you can use for what it can do, so I wouldn't really recommend going for that. BXR, it's basically an exotic, but it's a legendary. It's one of the few legendary weapons in the game where you could take it with the right roll into any and all activities, in both PvE and PvP, and it'll do amazing. Its stats are just a tier above everything else, and its archetype and entire family, and it's just an amazing weapon. The fact that you can craft it just makes it all the more better. And so yes, if you get all the red borders for this, then craft it, because it's gonna do everything you want a weapon to do. Smite of Moraine is new. It's got some unique rolls as well. I think it's a pretty good just basic PvE weapon that you can make fit to any playstyle that you really want. Having something like Demolitionist and Firefly is just a great all-around add, clear, and build weapon in the same weapon, so I would definitely recommend that. It's a great roll. It's one of the few random rolls that I've gotten for this pulse, and I like it a lot, so I would highly suggest that. But yeah, pretty much every pulse rifle, these four, I would say, are worth going for, especially the Battler. That's definitely one of the best weapons in the game. As far as scout rifles go, they're scout rifles. I have a very niche pointed inquiry made for high-end content and GMs, as I can pull up right here. I use it because it has enhanced disruption break, which is amazing for anti-barrier if I'm not running Arbalist, or adaptive munition, sorry. So whenever anti-barrier scout rifle comes along, which it usually does, it's a great perk for breaking anti-barrier shields, and so that's what I use it for. That's really the only scout rifle that I would say is worth crafting. Doom of Chelchis is a King's Fall weapon, and it has unique perks, and so if you're into using scout rifles, especially its Dragonfly Firefly roll, which is pretty cool, and other interesting rolls that it can do, then by all means go for it if you have the red borders for it. But as far as the other ones go, let me actually just see if Tarnished that can roll with the new Jolted perk, because I believe it can. So yeah, so Volt Shot is an interesting perk, and something that may warrant usage on subpar weapons like this, and the sidearm as well, as we'll get into in a bit. But as far as pretty much any and all scout rifles go, there's really not a reason to use them, just because of how PvE works. They are used sometimes in high-end activities like GMs, but we've power crept so much that we can honestly just kind of face tank and blow through GMs now, which is kind of crazy. And so you're not really required to run a long-range primary like you might have used to done seasons ago before all the 3.0 subclasses came out. So as far as sidearms go, Drang is Drang and really needs no introduction. Craft it. It's another one of the few weapons that can pretty much be used in any piece of content for both PvE and PvP. It's another incandescent weapon, so if you want to use it like that, then you can, but its stats are great, perks are great, and so if you have the red borders for it, or if you need a good energy PvE or PvP weapon, sidearm especially, then Drang is pretty much your best option. Empirical Evidence is a fun weapon to use. It's an aggressive sidearm and works fairly well. It's another Throne World weapon, so it's pretty easy to craft. Pretty sure you actually just guaranteed to craft it from doing the Witch Queen campaign, so probably already are able to craft this. But it's also a great PvP weapon with perpetual motion and harmony. Just works amazing. Adagio also works pretty well on it. It's kind of more of a preference type weapon, to where if you like sidearms and you like this archetype specifically, it'll do wonders for you. It's a very good weapon. I'm not the best on M&K. I've been trying to learn it, and not the best at Crucible yet, but sidearms don't feel that great on M&K. It's kind of the community consensus on them, but it felt pretty good to me, so take that how you will. And then Brigand's Law, I mean, it's an energy sidearm. It can roll with the new perk that allows it to jolt and such. So as far as its other perks go, it's not necessarily something that you would use for something like what it's supposedly designed for, which is that ad clear. There's much better energy close range weapons that are much more efficient and do a better job at ad clear, so probably not the best thing to invest your time into, but if you have nothing else to do, then why not? As far as SMGs go, Osteostriga is an exotic, so craft it if you don't have it and you have the resources for it. It's a really good weapon. Forensic Nightmare really isn't worth crafting. Submission is an amazing weapon, can be used in both PvE and PvP. It's a Vow the Disciple weapon, so it's just kind of guaranteed to be good. Callous Mini Tool is an amazing PvE weapon. It has the Midas synergy, so I guess you can use it for that. Most people, I would say, don't use it for that, which is kind of ironic. But as far as its perks go, it's got both Unrelenting and Threat Detector, I would say, are really what you want to go for PvE. And then it has Incandescent, so if you want to use Incandescent, you can. I personally use Surrounded. I tried Incandescent on this weapon, and I didn't really get much mileage out of it last season when Solar was, you know, as insane as it was last season. It's still really good, but it was thanks to all of the seasonal artifact mods. I use Surrounded now just for the higher damage output, just because I find more mileage out of that. So that's what I would recommend for the Callous Mini Tool. And of course for a PvP role you would go for, I believe it's Moving Target, and then something along the lines of maybe Tap the Trigger or Eye of the Storm. But it's a very good weapon. It's a 900 RPM, so it's just gonna work well because that archetype is really good. Blood Feud, I'm Cool Guy just made a video on this, and it has a few things going for it, but I personally, from its perk pool, it's not exactly something that I would recommend trying to invest into, because there's just better options out there for what it is trying to do. And so that's pretty much the case for a lot of these, unfortunately. So moving on to the special weapons. As far as fusion rifles go, unfortunately Epicurean, being as difficult as it was to get before they buffed the drop chance of it, it's not that good. Its perk pool is kind of mediocre, and so I wouldn't recommend going for it or crafting it. Deliverance was and is still a unique fusion. I mean, it's a stasis one, and it can roll with some interesting perks as well. It's great for builds, I would say. If you want a chill clip weapon, you're probably better off with a Riptide, because Riptide is a faster fire rate, and Riptide can roll auto-loading. And so that's kind of the, like, you know, synergistic combo that you would go for. But that doesn't mean that you can't make it work on this as well. But I don't really use this weapon much, just because there's not really a lot of uses for it, unfortunately. I would just say use a Riptide if that has chill clip on it, but it still works well. It's a decent PvP fusion as well if you roll for perpetual motion and tap the trigger. So I would suggest running that if you want a kinetic PvP fusion that's pretty decent. That's gonna probably perform better than Riptide, since Riptide's in a fast firing archetype like Likely Suspect, and those are not very good in Crucible right now, unfortunately. Which brings me into Likely Suspect. It's been nerfed a couple of times through the perk combinations that have made it so good, like Firmly Planted and Successful Warm-Up. Successful Warm-Up hasn't changed, but Firmly Planted has. And so it's kind of a shadow of its former self, and still a fun fusion rifle to use, but I wouldn't consider it to be a meta pick by any means. Mido's Reckoning just came out as well. Has some PvE synergy that is very good. Error made a video on it recently. Just the fact that you can overflow the magazine to take advantage of multiple reservoir bursts at the same time with its origin trait just makes it a great ad clear weapon, but doesn't mean it's the best ad clear energy special weapon, which we'll get to later. Glaives are another archetype of weapon where if you like glaives, by all means use them. You can make them work for you very well in both PvE and PvP. I'm not a glaive person, so I don't really pay attention to the roles that are important on them, but I guess just kind of the general sense is Impulse Amplifier is great, and I guess Unstoppable Force is what you want to go for as well for the Enigma. That's kind of the role I always see people using, so that seems to be what you go for. But I don't really use glaives. I don't really like their playstyle, and so I don't use them that often, if at all. As far as grenade launchers go, all three of these are great. Grenade launcher utility as utility weapons, like these two more are, do their jobs well. You know, auto-loading blinding nades and Vorpal or something on this, and then auto-loading either One for All or Disruption Break for PvP. And then you have arguably the best ad clear weapon in the game. That's an energy special weapon with using Ambitious Assassin and Chain Reaction for Forbearance. That's if you could craft one weapon, I would say craft this, because it's just, it makes so much of this game kind of laughably easy because of how well it ad clears. And it's the weapon that I have the most levels and most kills on that I've crafted by far, I believe mine's around a level 150 with about 15,000 kills on it, so it's very amazing and just is... I can't describe it. I'm at a loss for words at how well this thing does its job, so definitely craft this if you can, and definitely go for it if you haven't gotten all the red borders for it. I'm going to quickly check to see if Pardon Our Dust's perk pool has changed since it's craftable now. It seems like it's lost the perks that aren't really going to make a difference. So yeah, I would still go for auto-loading, and then maybe Vorpal if you're using it for blinding nades, that is. Just because when you're using a weapon as a blinding grenade launcher, you're not really trying to get kills with it, you're more so using it as a utility weapon. And so things like Rampage and, you know, other things that require kills aren't really that important. But when you have it out and you occasionally direct hit majors and bosses and stuff, Vorpal is just kind of that additional thing that's 15% because it's a special weapon. And of course there's other roles, you know, Demolitionist is going to work if you're using it on base low tier ads and such, and Adrenaline Junkie if you're building into that, but I would just say that's probably the best role when you're using it as a utility weapon like it does. So as far as shotguns go, the Ragnhild's a solid option for a kinetic shotgun. Without Remorse is a solid option for an energy shotgun. Wastelander is a solid option for a kinetic shotgun. No Reprieve is a great kinetic slug, especially synergizing with Stasis and Shadebinder, and I mean all Stasis, but I say that because of how much Glow is enjoying it this season. He's made a video on it, so I would check that out if you want to see how well this thing works with Shadebinder especially. But yeah, these three shotguns especially, they all work very well for what you would want to do. Between the Ragnhild and the Wastelander, it's really pick your preference. The Wastelander's a lightweight, and the Ragnhild's aggressive, so you're trading, you know, slightly higher one-hit kill distance versus the lightweight benefits, and Wastelander feels nice to a lot of people, and it has a smaller reticule, and so people say it makes it easier for them to land shots. You know, can take that as you will. But as far as shotguns go, they're all definitely good picks, and so I would recommend crafting any of them if you want a good energy or kinetic shotgun to go for. Sniper rifles are an interesting discussion because it's all really comes down to preference. Some of them, like Beloved, people are pretty much generally in agreement upon that it's a very good sniper, and there are other ones like it that aren't craftable that we know of that, of course, everyone thinks is a good sniper. And so for ones that can roll with PvE perks, can work with PvE perks, like both Defiance of Yasmin and Thoughtless, if you need something like that, then I would definitely recommend it. I have my Thoughtless that is level 61 just because I take it into content where I would need a long range something when I pair it with something like Trespasser, or I'm using an exotic heavy and an energy weapon like Funnel Web or Forgiveness like this, something with close range primary. I need a long range something to deal with anything else, so that's why I have this, and I just throw it on whenever I need to. I don't use it that often, but it does come in handy occasionally, and so I would recommend that. But as far as something like Father's Sins go, it comes down to ultimately your preference. I personally like it, but it's a rapid fire sniper, and their archetype isn't really the greatest because they can't even double body, for obvious reasons, but that makes it kind of a less forgiving sniper rifle, even though it has amazing perks like Under Pressure and Opening Shot. So as far as trace rifles go, they are another preference archetype of weapon. They're definitely fun. The exotic ones I enjoy a lot. And these can definitely work for you, but as far as their ammo economy, at the cost of what they do, there's not really a reason to use them in any high-end content. And for low-end content, you can kind of get away with the best primary weapons in the game that are energy weapons, doing almost, if not more, than what trace rifles can do. So I would recommend crafting them if you enjoy using trace rifles, but I wouldn't recommend crafting them because they might be better than other options, because other options are better than them, unfortunately. Tarnation is a heavy grenade launcher, and heavy grenade launchers had about a few days to shine at the beginning of the season before they were nerfed because they were buffed to an unreasonable amount, and that's not really relevant. And so the only reason I would use a heavy grenade launcher right now is for PvP, just because they work well there, and there are better options than Tarnation, like something like a memory interdict. So I wouldn't recommend crafting it. Linear fusions, as far as they go, Cataclysmic is pretty much the best because of bait and switch. Having the 35% damage bonus, you can't really go wrong with that. And having that in 4 times the charm, it's ammo efficient, high damage, consistent damage, total damage. There's really nothing that can compete with it, especially when you're on Warlock running well, because you can take advantage of Phantomite with it being solar. The Taipan is another free craftable weapon from this season, and it's void and craftable, and it can replace, it can be in the place of Reed's Regret that people either can't obtain by themselves, or the fact that they couldn't get one before, because it can roll with triple tap and firing line, and that's kind of the go-to, combination for these things. And so I would suggest just doing that for that. Both great weapons. The Sail Spy, Storm Chaser is probably still going to be better than it, even though Storm Chaser is arguably easier or harder to get depending on how you look at it. But this isn't really worth crafting. Its perk pool doesn't warrant it to be crafted, so I wouldn't recommend it. Machine guns are machine guns. If you like using them, you can use them. If you don't like using them, like most people don't, then it's not really worth crafting them. Fixed odds can roll with Killing Tally and Incandescent, so it's a decent weapon for that if you want it for that, but there's not really a reason to sacrifice your entire heavy slot for ad clear when energies and primary, when special weapons and primaries do the same thing. Arguably sometimes better, sadly, so I wouldn't really recommend crafting any machine guns. Rocket launchers are rocket launchers. As far as how useful any of these are for crafting, probably not. With the changes that were made recently to them dividing the different archetypes into subfamilies of damage, Palmyra isn't as good as it used to be. But it's still good, especially when you're taking advantage of Stasis Phantomite from Supreme Wellmaker. But the rocket combination with something like Izanangi's just kind of hasn't been as relevant because linears are so good by themselves. You don't even need the swaps for them. So if you like using rocket launchers, by all means go for it. Bump of the Night can roll both Chill Clip and Chain Reaction, which is kind of funny. So I guess it's kind of great for huge groups of ads, but again, there's special weapons and primary weapons that can do that much better. So it's kind of the sad thing about power creep. And then as far as swords go, final thing, yes, these are both worth crafting, just because of the fact that you can get Eager Edge, which makes this game so much more enjoyable and fun, at least for me and for a lot of people. Lets you go fast, and if you're that type of person, lets you kill your teammates by yeeting them into walls. But the other half is probably the better one because it can roll something like Vorpal. I have Frenzy on it just because it's a higher damage bonus, and I pretty much always have Frenzy up for any encounter where I use the sword to actually damage something instead of just straight movement because of eager edge, but I would still recommend crafting those. That's really the only swords I use anymore. I don't use any other legendary sword. So yeah, as far as those go, that's kind of the general consensus on, from what I understand. I've played this game a fair amount, you know. I do a lot of PvE and PvP, so I would say that I generally know something about what's good and what is kind of meh for activities that you would normally be running in this current sandbox. And like I said, things could change, things could get nerfed, things could get buffed, so we'll just have to see how this game changes in the future. But as far as crafting all of these different weapons that you see here, that's what I would consider to be worthwhile and what is worth passing on. So hope you enjoyed this guide, and thanks for listening through all of it. I know it was pretty long, but that's just something I thought that people would want to know if since there's a lot of weapons that are craftable, you know, it's worth knowing which one's worth going for and which one isn't because of the time investment required and the materials. So, yep. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you guys later.